So hello and welcome to a special live edition of the MCC Brussels Podcast. Two exciting things that we're ticking off tonight. The first is this: we're recording the podcast in front of a live audience as something of an experiment. But secondly, we're devoting the entire episode today to analysing the results of a very important election in Germany. So stay with us through the podcast. We're going to be really diving in deep to everything that's going on. If you are joining us for the first time on the podcast, remember to subscribe, certainly like and share it with your friends. We're really trying to build something of an alternative narrative and an alternative media here in Brussels. So please like, share, and subscribe. We'd be delighted to see more of you in the future. To dig into this important result, we've got a slightly extended format, extended panel tonight, and I'll introduce them very briefly. Firstly, Alexander Jungbluth, MEP, who's in the Europe of the Sovereign Nations group for the AfD. Alexander, welcome.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here tonight.
Great. And we're also joined by Sabine Böppler-Spal, who's the chair of a liberal think tank in Berlin, liberal in the old, better sense, not liberal in the bad American sense, and also the author of a report that we've just put out called Silencing Alternatives, the Free Speech Crisis in Germany. Sabine, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
And a round of applause already, right. And lastly, familiar to many of our viewers, joined by our Executive Director, Frank Frady. Frank.
Nice to be here. Very
good. Right. So the election, I'm sure many of our viewers and certainly our audience will be very familiar with in outline. A slightly revived CDU, CSU under Friedrich Merz won the election in overall terms, but still at one of their kind of lowest performances in their history, so still not exactly kind of fully revived. But the main story that most people are talking about, and one of the reasons we got Alexander with us tonight, is because obviously a huge surge for the AfD, although many people have been almost disappointed they didn't do better, but still a remarkable result. Thankfully, despite my green suit, we saw a hammering for the Greens, which I'm always pleased to know, and certainly also for the Liberals. One of the underreported stories is obviously a kind of boost to the Linke, to the far left party. Very big turnout, certainly in the election, one of the largest in post-reunification history and in German history more generally, really. And also interesting story among the youth vote in terms of both on the further extremes of the compass, as it were, both people going to the left or to the AfD. So there's definitely lots to dig into. But Alexander, what was your initial reaction to the results? Are you happy with how the AfD did? What's the story from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good result. So it's the best result we gain as AfD in our history. And at least we doubled our result from the last elections. So maybe, I guess, the polls before it was between, let's say, 20 and 23%, and now we gained a bit more than 20, and maybe some of us has the expectations that we always will grow even more, and I guess we will grow even more in the next years. But I guess because it was some hope to have, let's say, 23 or 24%. But at least if you see it on an objective view, then you say this is really, really a very, very good result. And, you know, we have been increasing for the last months, and I'm very sure that we will increase in the next years. What is quite interesting is, especially as you said, the left growth. I guess the left were able to, you know, they have a very big campaign against AfD and the right. So as I said in Germany, you know, democracy is going to be destroyed if AfD gets so many votes. And this was the whole left in Germany who does that. And the left was able to become head of this anti-AfD movement. But, and this is the most important thing, the left in general did lose. So, you know, the socialists, they have a minus of, I guess, 14, 15%. Mm-hmm. The Greens have a very, very big minus. So in general, the left in Germany has really a decreasing development. So they won't be able to have any succeed in Germany. And the last point you mentioned, you know, the AfD have always very good results with the young voters, and now we share it a bit with the lefts because they made quite a good social media campaign, but I'm very sure that they won't get it in the long term, and we will see. We have gained young voters for a long term, and I guess in the future, young people in Germany will see that the only solution for the society is what AfD wants to do with it, and I guess we will get them back.
Yeah, well, and Sabina, I mean, we'll get on to the possible coalition formation in the moment, as much as that looks like a return to the days of Germany past. But in many ways, the key to understanding the election is that this was a kind of rejection of the kind of governing parties that had done so much damage to Germany.
Yeah, I think that's the main take for me, is that it really spells the slow death of the established parties. And there was always this mood beforehand of a tsunami coming towards them, and they were always hoping, because there were all these talks about a third of the voters not yet decided, and they were always hoping it might not turn out quite so bad. And even though the AfD did pretty much as the polls said it would do, the other parties actually did worse than they had hoped. So they were always hoping that that 1/3 of undecided voters would then turn towards the old established parties, which actually they didn't. So the CDU did, as you said, had its second worst result ever, and they are now celebrating themselves as winners. I know somebody who actually went to the CDU election party, and he told me they were sort of cheering as the results came out, saying, oh yes, we're the strongest party, but as soon as they realized how badly they'd actually done, the mood was very, very muted that evening. And I mean, the SPD, the Social Democrats, were completely shattered, just over 16%. And as you said, the Green Party, there's another very significant thing about the Greens, which is that Robert Habeck, who was always the big star of the Greens, the great hope, a chancellor candidate, actually lost his constituency. He's just resigned yesterday.
Yeah, I let out a cheer when that happened.
Yeah, and so did we. I mean, we all did. And, it really shows how shattered they are. And yes, and the votes of the young people is very, very significant. It means, I think, the days of the old parties are kind of counted. And we've never had this, just one last sentence, that after an election, almost like 24 hours later, everybody in the established field is talking about, oh my God, what's going to happen in 2029? That's a funny thing. So they were saying, if we don't get it together now, in 2029, the AfD is going to be the strongest party. That's very odd, because normally you'd imagine them presenting a program, saying, this is what we're going to do, but everything is fixated on that one party, on the populists. So it is, it's like a populist tsunami, and it's not finished yet.
Yeah, and Frank, despite this huge rhetorical and media kind of mobilization against the AfD, this attempt to shore up the firewall, the cordon sanitaire, this was still, it seems that story didn't really land with a large number of people, that despite the really huge turnout, it wasn't that people were swayed into kind of shoring up the old parties.
No, I think the interesting thing was that insofar as there is a kind of politics of hysteria that's directed against populist parties, it tends to lead to other parties than the mainstream benefiting from that. And my big takeaway from looking at the election is that it's remarkably similar to what's happening in America, to what happened in Holland, to what's happening in France. Literally everywhere in Europe, you find what political scientists call the de-alignment of party politics, which basically means that people stop voting to the parties that they always voted for in the past. So that people that voted for the CDU for generations suddenly wake up one morning and they realize that this is not their party. Similarly with the socialists, people that voted for the SPD realize that something has gone really fundamentally wrong. So we got this very fluid situation. And that basically means that the mainstream center in Germany is following the path of what happened to the mainstream parties in Italy and in France or in Holland and other places, which by and large is a really good thing. Unlike many people in this room, my big issue wasn't the Greens or the SPD. I don't particularly like them, but it's always been the CDU, because we always think that the CDU in Brussels and in Germany is the biggest roadblock, is the biggest barrier for conservatism or for populism to make real gains, because the CDU always pretends or always plays this card that, oh yeah, we really care about immigration. oh yeah, we really are going to oppose the Green Deal. Oh yeah, we're going to do something about gender and all the rest of that. It was very, very interesting. One thing that really struck me as an outside observer, before the election, the parliament in Germany passed the gender identification law. And, which is a horrible thing that, this is passed as a law in Germany. And you would have thought that the CDU, if it was a genuinely conservative party, would have basically made that into a political issue. They could have really mobilized a lot of support in relation to that, but it was complete silence about that. And I just think that what this really shows is that the game is over. The only question becomes, in the long run, who is going to become the beneficiary? I'm fairly sure in the next election, it will be the AfD, but in the long run, not in the medium term, the question still remains, how is this going to play out with the younger generations, with the young people who are still undecided about which day they will turn?
Yeah. And Alexander, actually, that was one of the points I wanted to put to you, was that obviously there was this concerted effort by Merz to present the CDU-CSU as a kind of changed party, rejuvenated party. They were suddenly going to talk tough on immigration. They suddenly had a sense of kind of listening to people's concerns on that. There was also that famous flirtation with ending the firewall in that parliamentary drama in the run-up to the election. I presume you don't put much faith that that's gonna pan out.
Yeah, actually, I think when we talk about CDU, we have to see the CDU as two different parties. So we have one CDU in the government and one CDU in the opposition. So the CDU in the government is for migration and does not do anything to secure the society, and the CDU in opposition does completely the different thing. When we remember, we have the really difficult situation in whole of Europe and especially in Germany with the migration. And let us remember who is responsible that we have these big problems with migration. And it was the CDU and Angela Merkel who opened the borders in 2015. The next big point in Germany is that we have a decreasing economy. And the decreasing economy is especially because the industry has very big problems, and these big problems depends on that we have the highest energy costs inside of Germany. And Friedrich Merz said that we have to take more nuclear power in Germany. And who destroyed the nuclear power in Germany? It was also the CDU. So they are responsible for almost all negative developments in the society. And now in the opposition, especially in the last months before the elections, they said is completely different, but now it is so they will be part of the government again. And when they work together with the socialists, nobody believes that they're going to have any solutions in migration policy. They won't have any solutions in economic issues. So things will stay worse in Germany, which is very, very sad. But as mentioned before, I guess in the long run we will be always, or AfD is going to become always stronger, and that is a good point of that.
Yeah, and Sabina, look, one of the things, it wasn't exactly a campaign issue in the election, but one of the ways that we can always, I think, understand at least part of the appeal of populist parties or moves away from the traditional centre is through people being desperate to kind of express their voice, to have a sense that their concerns are taken seriously. And I wanted to put this point to you specifically because you've written this report for us on the real crisis, the free speech crisis in Germany, the weaponization of various laws to really clamp down on dissent. And is it true that one way we can kind of understand this, both on, as it happens, I think, on the left as well as on the right, like we've seen plenty of examples of people on the left being shut down as well for their views. So it is one way to understand this kind of move away from the traditional parties, that people are in some sense fed up with being dictated to what they can and can't say and think.
Yes, I think that's definitely a case. And I mean, they've also lost respect. So it's kind of funny. I know Frank says he's not fixated with the SPD, but I'm a little bit fixated with them because they ran their last campaign under the motto respect, meaning, we want to respect voters, and of course they didn't respect them at all. And the clearest sign is, of course, this clamping down on free speech. And people have then said, well, we've been told all these years that there's been almost like a campaign against AfD voters and against anybody who dissents. And they were saying, well, actually, the repressive part of this is actually the other side. So people have seen that very clearly. And I actually think that's also what got the Liberals in the end. So we have one Liberal politician who's been at the forefront of all these charges against normal citizens. And I don't think people haven't missed that point at all. And there's actually a Liberal organization, it's called So Done, which played a very important role in placing charges, sort of screening the internet for offences against politicians and then encouraging politicians to place charges. And I think people did get that a little bit. I mean, that's completely counter-liberal. That's absolutely against any kind of liberal principle. And so people were saying, well, if that's the kind of politics we're getting, maybe the only truly liberal party, in the sense the party that stands for free speech and sort of represents people who have a different opinion, are the more extreme parties, is the AfD, which has always been at the end of that kind of campaign. So I think that actually it does play a very important role. Yes.
Yeah, and Frank, one of the issues that was thrown up repeatedly in the run-up to the election, which I'm interested in your take on, is the one of the standard arguments rolled out against, especially the AfD, but is the idea that you can't re-examine Germany's history, that there's only one kind of narrative that's acceptable, and all of Germany's history has to be cast in the light of an ongoing battle against Nazism and whatever they would call its kind of contemporary forms. It seems that there's much more willingness in Germany and among Germans to begin to question whether the only way to deal with the legacy of Nazism is to have a firewall against the AfD.
Well, it's a very difficult question, because historically, what happens in Germany, because of the Nazi experience, has consequences for conservatism all over Europe. You will know that after the Second World War, all right-wing ideas of any form lost their legitimacy and became discredited. And you will know that intellectually and morally, conservative parties throughout Europe have been on the defensive ever since, and they never actually regained the intellectual clarity and the intellectual dynamism that it might have had beforehand. Mainly because how could you be a genuine conservative if you cannot talk about the nation openly and enthusiastically? How could you be a conservative if nationalism has this negative connotation? How could you, in a sense, be a sovereigntist under those circumstances? And that has went on for a very, very long time. And the trouble was that the attempts by people on the right to deal with this, I think for decades and decades, have been very feeble and very wrong. So you had idiotic reactions to that by saying that the Holocaust was a very small matter, was just a teeny incident in the general scheme of things, which is obviously stupid if you say something like that. Instead of celebrating German history and the achievements of Germany throughout the centuries and the incredible contribution they made to Western civilization, they became very defensive in the way that was done. Now, I think that's changing a little bit. I think there's a long way to go. Listening to even my AfD friends, you'll find that some of them are still very, very defensive, or lack the confidence to be able to deal with this in a kind of positive kind of a way. A lot of others are not. A lot of others really understand that in a sense, they are now in a situation where they don't have to bear the burden of guilt of what happened in the past forever, and to actually liberate themselves from that. But I still think it's a long way to go. And the proof of that is the ease with which, for example, the Linke has been brought back into life from death. The only reason why the left party managed to get 10%, which is quite significant, after it's been written off entirely, is because they were able to mobilize on the anti-fascism issue in the big cities. And the very fact that that anti-fascism issue still had an appeal to young people in the cities indicate that we still haven't actually won the battle of ideas in the way it's got to be if we are going to resolve this historic intellectual, moral, and political defeat that stems from the Second World War.
Yeah, Alexander, I'm sure you'll want to reflect on this question too.
Yeah, so I think that just to get out the last point, there are some young people who just vote for the left, but I guess, we see what is quite interesting in Germany is that with the young voters, they are not stable, so we see that they change a lot, or many of them change a lot, but in general, for midterm, they vote for AfD. So I guess we have now a point of view that they got almost 10%, but I'm very sure they have very high conflicts, for example, in their party, and I'm very sure they will decrease. So we will, I guess the problem of the party of the left will salute on its own, and if we talk about guilt of history, we should mention that it's this party is the party who already have governed in the east of Germany, and they are guilty for many murderers in this country, and it's a very bad country, bad party, and I'm very sure that it will be decreased in the next months. But I guess if we talk about the point of guilty, yes, I guess we have a completely new kind of right politics we do now. Yes, and I guess in Germany they try to figure out some kind of this anti-fascistic movement, because they say, okay, if AfD is going to be governed, we will have the same situation than we had when the Nazis were in the government. This is really, I guess, we are on a point, especially in the populations, they don't believe, because it's really stupid, yeah, and more they are not able to convince the people. When AfD was founded, it was really a problem. They made this compares quite often, and we are now at the moment where the population just said, "Oh yes, there's next Nazi prejudice against this party, and we don't care about that anymore." So I guess also in this case, there's something changes in the German society.
Yeah, Sabina, do you want to pick up on this? There's other things we can.
Well, I actually think that is a weakness of the AfD, and I think historic relativism is a problem by several AfD politicians. So you have people like, that's a couple of years ago, somebody like Gauland saying German fascism was only a bird shit in history, which wasn't a very clever thing to say. Or you have somebody like Höcke. I listened to his speech, the Dresden speech, which was it was a catastrophe, I have to say, and it's just not convincing. And I think the AfD really has to overcome that and really has to kind of come to terms with that. I don't know about. I think young people. I think it's right. Yes. So there was this idea that because of that rhetoric and because of these mistakes being made by AfD politicians. The slogan "Alles für Germany." We know that was a not unclever play on the kind of charge Höcke got when he said "Alles für Deutschland," which was an old SS slogan, and so they used that in a playful way. But on the other hand, it was something which kind of stuck with young people, and I think there were a number of young people who, I think Frank is right, who then said, well, we need to build up an Antifa, which is not the idea of the young people themselves, it's actually the adults who placed that in their heads. So I've got 2 kids who went through Berlin schools, and I know that they were kind of constantly confronted with that idea of, having to fight the fascists. So it's actually a very a preoccupation more of the adult world, which has been projected onto young people. But I think we need something much more clever than what we have. I know a number of...
Sure. And I know Alex wants to come in. Alexander, yeah.
So I just wanted to disagree with one point you just mentioned, because I guess in Germany they do the following thing. They always try to do something that has to any kind of comparison to the Nazi Germany. And as you just mentioned, there was one sentence of Höcke, and he said, "Alles für Deutschland." So it's in the German word for all for Germany. So, and I ask you, what is so crazy about saying that? So I don't think this is a problem. And I guess nobody in Germany, or let's say 98% of the German population, didn't know it. so I'm also one of them, that it was something that was mentioned by the Nazis. And what is the problem is more that we have even lawyers who just try to make any connection. And this is just a case that the rule of law in Germany doesn't work, because they figure out any sentence that isn't difficult at all, and they try to get them to judge. And I guess so in some cases you are right, but especially the last sentence more shows that rule of law doesn't really exist in Germany in a good way.
Yeah, I want to move on to something else, Frank, because one of the things that was obviously capturing media attention and world attention in the run-up to the election was obviously the very visible presence of American politicians, especially J.D. Vance and Elon Musk, being involved in various different ways around the German elections. On the one hand, I mean, as people will know who follow our YouTube channel, I was cheering Vance's speech. I thought it was a brilliant intervention. I agreed with almost every word of it, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, you felt that this kind of involvement of American politicians always has a kind of double-edged sword quality to it. And I wonder if, at least in this election, did that play into the dynamics of the election at all? What did you make of that?
Well, I mean, I thought the Vance speech in Munich was brilliant. And I know, like, my wife could not stop talking about it for a week. It was going on and on and on. And she got pictures of J.D. Vance all over the house, sort of, as a result of that. So I thought that was really brilliant. And I thought that it was actually, quite good that, Orban, for example, met the head of the AfD, that, for example, Trump also went out of this way to make those meetings happen. However, I do think, and I say this as a sovereignist, that every time a leader of a foreign power intervenes in a domestic election, it doesn't have the impact that you'd imagine. I know, for example, that I know a lot more about Hungary as a Hungarian than about Germany. And I do know that if Trump basically said that people should vote for Orban, even though I support Orban, it would not have a good effect. Most Hungarians would resent the fact that somebody puts their nose into what is a domestic matter. And I think that a lot of people who imagined that Elon Musk's and Trump's intervention was going to help they were mistaken, didn't understand that in many respects the same sovereignist spirit that leads to supporting Alex's party is also the same sovereignist spirit that doesn't always like when foreigners tell Germans what to do and what not to do. And I think that there's a lesson there. It didn't cause any problems, but it certainly didn't have the stimulating effect that people fantasized about.
Yeah, and one related thing, Alexander, to that was that it, and has been, I think, the dominant narrative in the wake of the election, really, has been the way that Merz has begun to cast himself not just as now the likely Chancellor of Germany, but also the kind of now the savior of Europe. He's the person who's going to put together the new defense agreements. He's even kind of almost talking about starting a European version of NATO, et cetera, et cetera. And so that this difficult geopolitical moment that we're in has in some sense allowed Merz, I don't think most people find it a bit superficial, but has allowed him to cast himself much more in the role of a leader.
Yeah, at least, on a point what I just mentioned before, on a position of opposition, you are able to talk about a lot of things and just say that you have a positive view, a positive perspective for Europe and Germany. And I guess it might be that in some cases he was able to convince some people with this kind of rhetoric, with this kinds of idea, which are mostly just a copy of the ideas of AfD. But so at least I'm quite sure that he will not be able to have solutions when he governs. So at least, when we talk about in 4 years, and my co-speakers also mentioned that, I'm pretty sure that AfD will be the strongest party in Germany exactly because of that, because he is not able to get the ideas he made when he was in the opposition to have solutions for that when he is in the government. And I guess because of that, CDU is going to be decreased, the socialists, all parties are going to be decreased, and I'm quite sure that in 4 years we are going to be the strongest party in Germany.
Yeah, well, we talked already, Sabina, about how it was kind of unconvincing, the CDU suddenly taking a strong stance on migration. But we've also, I mean, in this whole conversation, we haven't even mentioned the economy. And when there were these reports of Merz coming out and saying that the French and the British might provide the nuclear weapons and Germany's going to fund it because we've got this fantastic economy that everybody is really jealous. And I was like, have they not been paying attention to the last few years in Germany, right?
I think they have. I mean, we've had, we're not talking about just a few, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of industrial jobs which have fallen away. Just Mercedes has announced cutting jobs just last week. Today I read that Stadler, a big company in Berlin, is in deep trouble. We do have a very, very swift and rapid deindustrialization. And Merz has always been presented as the kind of man who might be able to solve that because they said, well, he came from the kind of free business sector. So he left politics. He was a rebel. He was an opponent of Merkel, which is actually quite interesting, which is the only reason why he was able to be pushed through at this stage, because he was actually an anti-Merkel man. So they were selling him to us as somebody who would do away with the problems Merkel created. But I agree with my co-speaker here that, yes, I don't think he will solve the problems. I mean, he's a very pro-EU man for a start. So if he continues to always be, how is he going to manage the migration problem if he continues to support the EU the way he does? He actually embraced von der Leyen at the beginning of his election campaign, even though the CDU, many in the CDU said they don't like the Green Deal. Well, why does he, you've never heard him say anything against the Green Deal. He always makes these kind of allusions. So he's not going to, and as was said before, he's trying to build a cooperation with the Social Democrats, which are not going to allow for any of the things we need, like a reduction of bureaucracy. He's been talking about that, but I don't see that. I don't know how he's going to be able to achieve that with his new coalition partner, nor is he going to be able to get Germany's totally over-the-top social security expenditures under control, because that's a very big thing for the Social Democrats. They're not going to allow cuts. That's their main kind of political line, and Merz is not going to be able to do any of the things which Germany really will need. So I don't think I agree. I think it'll be the next years will be lost years, will be years which again we're in a kind of transition, and we'll see what happens after that.
Frank, what do you make of Merz?
Well, he kind of reminds me of a kind of a pawn shop Macron. Very similar in terms of Macron talks about strategic autonomy. He talks about being the leader of Europe and being this military leader. I think the big difference between Macron and him is that Macron is a little bit shorter and has got an older wife. But otherwise, in terms of their effectiveness, I see not very much difference between the two of them. I think that, for example, his posturing on the military front comes across as both very naive but also dangerous, because the implication of what he's saying is that somehow Germany is going to play this kind of militaristic role in a world where Germany is not in a position to do that, not just simply because of its financial difficulties, but if you look at the German military, it's not exactly God's gift to sort of warrior culture. I always remember what happened in Afghanistan, where the German troops there, if you remember, were famous for sitting around playing cards while everybody else was out fighting. And the argument was that we're not allowed to fight and we're not allowed to do this and that. I think that culture still exists in terms of people's attitude. And I think that kind of Macron-like posturing, which was possibly tolerable 10 years ago or 8 years ago, in today's world is positively corrosive, because should he really become the leading voice in European politics, it would really have a very corrosive impact upon European political life. The only positive outcome that would have is that would, in a sense, weaken, almost irrevocably wound the Brussels oligarchy. If someone like him was put into that leadership position, I mean, that will be like, imagine von der Leyen and him being in that position, that would really expose the shallow, empty character of the people that dominate the Brussels bubble.
Yeah, and Alexander, looking forward a little bit, I mean, the outline of a possible coalition is kind of clear, but I guess I'm not as interested in exactly what form the coalition is going to take, exactly what's going to be in the agreement, etc., as what it means for the next few years. And Sabina alluded to a kind of sense of political stasis that despite that, I mean, the only reason for this grand coalition is to keep out the AfD. It's like the only reason that the coalition exists. There's nothing else that they can agree on. So what are you thinking about in terms of the next few years? Is it going to just be a dull period for Germany, or is there an opportunity to make some of the points you'd like to make?
Yes, so first of all, we have to think about how stable this coalition will be. So I guess I'm not very sure about the numbers, but I guess I have 4 or 5 seats, more than 50%. So we have this coalition of CDU and SPD, but it isn't a big majority they now got in the government. And as we just said, there are many, many political issues where we have a very different position between the SPD and the CDU. And if you have a lot of different positions and you have a very short majority, we might think that we have the possibility that there will be a lot of conflicts. And I guess if these conflicts will development in the next years, it would be good for AfD.
And specifically, do you see an opportunity? I mean, lots of people, the key issue in the run-up was how long can the firewall hold? How long can they keep it out? Some people were even talking about potential of some kind of minority government in the wake of this that would then. But do you see specifically an opportunity in the next few years for further weakening of the firewall once the inevitable kind of partnership between the CDU and the SPD falls into trouble? Do you think there's more chance to weaken it?
Yeah, we will see that. So if the CDU is going to what we just said, what you just mentioned is that Merz has a lot of positions in the campaigns that were very close to AfD. So it might be. So we will see, but it might be that some of the members of CDU are going to say, okay, we now have to we told it to the voters, and now we have to make plans inside of the government that we are going to bring these things through. And if there won't be a majority with Social Democrats, it might be that we will give them the opportunity to get this thing through with AfD. We had the situations just a couple of months before the elections, and there was an idea of CDU that was supported by the AfD. So we had this moment once, and it might be that we will see this quite often in the next years. Yeah. I'm not very sure about. But at least maybe if this happens 1 or 2 times, the coalition will just break up, and we will have probably new elections. So I guess the highest opportunity for us is that this new coalition won't reach for 4 years, but it will break up earlier, and we will have new elections in, let's say, 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, so Sabina, the same question to you, I guess. I mean, is this a period of stasis, or are we going to be kind of interestedly following the possible rupture?
I think the firewall is going to break, but I don't think because of the CDU or because of Merz. I think it's going to collapse because of the people, because people's pressure is going to be just too strong. People are not going to accept to be kind of pushed to the side for much longer. We see this. I mean, despite all the campaigns we've had against the AfD, we still have 10 million Germans, I think it was 10 million, maybe more out of 50 million, who voted for the AfD. We said, I don't care. We don't give a shit anymore, basically. And that's going to continue. And they're very, very annoyed and angry at seeing the country collapsing. So we have knife crimes, steady knife crimes almost on a weekly basis. And people are saying, where are we? What's happening to our country? And they're going to continue asking that question. And somehow they're going to have to find solutions. And it's not going to these solutions aren't going to come from the establishment because they're too fixated with the EU, for example. As soon as Merz said, oh, this is going to be an EU problem, I knew it was over for him. So people are, so something is going to have to happen. And Maybe what will happen is that there'll be a shakeout within the Conservative Party. So Merz is going to have a very weak stand. He's actually, he's a bit stronger than Scholz was, but Scholz was a very weak, 28.5%. He's not a strong candidate. So people are going to put him under pressure, and something is going to happen. I think the old parties are slowly crumbling, but something new will come up, and I'm sure the firewall is going to fall because it just cannot continue.
Yeah, Frank, what can we look ahead to?
It's difficult because at the moment our discussion is based on the premise that next year, the year after, will be a continuation of today. And I think we live in a world where change is in the air everywhere. And that's happening both in terms of geopolitical shifts and fluidity, but it also happens on the economic and the social front in terms of the impact that this will have upon any one society. So I think the one thing that I'm 100% certain about is that the stasis that exists in Germany today will not have the same form in the years ahead as it is now, just because the circumstances will be ones that are very difficult to predict. But you can sense that neither the EU nor Germany are going to be able to maintain the status quo ante after this kind of election. I got a question which has been bothering me quite a bit since the election. When you look at the experience of most populist parties, they tend to get between 8 to 20 to a little bit 24, maybe in France a little bit more percent of the election, never get enough to constitute a majority. And that's something that I'm sure that Alex must be thinking about as well. When do you get to that point? But the question that I have is this. Until now, one of the things that has often happened in Sweden, for example, or in France, is you had a situation where there's a pretense of the firewall continuing. So, for example, the Swedish Democrats are supporting the government but are not in the government, if you see what I mean. In France, you have a situation where Le Pen and Bardella are not in the government but have a passive acquiescence to what's happening there. The question I have is this. Is it possible that, given the dynamics that are unfolding, that at some point the AfD might come to an agreement where they're not in government or they don't have any formal position, but they have a gentleman's agreement with the CDU or whatever combination there is? Because I think that that is the pattern we've seen in other parts of Europe. I don't know if it's possible in Germany, given the polarized ideals about the cordon sanitaire there, but that's just one thing that's bothering. I think that if you guys did that, that would be a big mistake, because it would basically mean that you lose your independence and your capacity to kind of move forward. But that certainly might be a very tempting way of limiting the appeal and the impact that your party might have in the future.
Yeah, well, I can see Alexander's nodding his head, so hopefully the AfD will kind of hold those dying parties to their feet to the fire and keep them honest. But for those on the MCC Brussels podcast, thanks for joining us. Do make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you want to carry on more of this conversation and catch all of the Q&A with the audience, head over to the live stream section on our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to hear the discussion that we're about to get into, which in MCC Brussels style is, with respect to my speakers, is always as interesting to hear what our audience make of it, but as elsewhere. But for now, thanks for joining us on the MCC Brussels podcast. We'll see you next week. Right, that's only the beginning, because as I say, now the kind of maybe, again, with respect, the more interesting part is to throw this open to the audience.
Surely not more interesting.
What we'll do, some of my colleagues have microphones. We'll maybe get the lights up in the house lights up as well would be useful. And the way we do it, for those of you new to an MCC Brussels event, we like to get a few questions and comments together, so it's not just a simple question and answer, but to kind of stimulate something of a public debate. So if you're interested in asking some more questions, if you've got a take on the election that we haven't, point that we've made, if you want to answer Frank's question, I know Alexander does in a second. But yeah, so some questions and comments, and then we'll come back to the panel. So there's one here, and then there's also one there. So we've got a couple of microphones, yeah. Anna first, this gentleman at the front, and then there's that person a little bit further back. Yeah, great.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for your discussion. Just for Frank, as somebody who served in Afghanistan in 2002, 2003 with the Canadian Reserve Unit at Kandahar, I can say that German armor wasn't permitted to leave their barracks on account of the emission norms. If the tanks hadn't been tested for their emission norms, they weren't allowed to leave. While the Afghans were cooking with paraffin. A Leopard 2 needed to have a clean diesel. But, anyway, that was just an anecdote. One of the things that surprised me, especially after the discussion we had, I think it was on the 29th of January here, was the firewall. And especially after this election, it's similar to the European elections. The firewall seems to be the antifaschistische Schutzmauer and the other way around, the anti-fascist wall. What you find interesting is that with the idea of the German left, and also the CDU basically, they've excluded the former German Democratic Republic. How does this play out? Thank you.
Great, thanks. As I say, I'll take a couple more, and then we'll have some comments coming first back to Alexander. So there's there's someone in the middle of the two people. So Anna, but firstly, this guy is standing up.
So my name's Alexander Hensler. I'm a student here at the Brussels School of Governance. It was briefly talked about the economy, but my question was, given the state of Germany's economy, what is the panel's thoughts and opinions on potentially lifting or reforming the debt brake for more targeted investment and more business-friendly opportunities in the economy compared to the stagnation we've all been suffering under up until now?
Great, thanks. Yeah, no, I know my political economist friends are going to be mad at me for not even mentioning the debt brake, so that's a useful comment. So, yeah.
Hello, guys. Last question. How do you analyze the gender gap? What we have been publishing in the European Conservative. There's a big gap between women voting for the Linke and then the men voting for AfD, especially the young people. We can see this in ideological harassment from Brussels, or whatever you want to call it, are changing people's minds, especially European natives. How do you analyze this in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, a great question. Another thing, so we can leave it there for a second. So you can first respond to the Frank question if you like, and then take a few of these. But Alexander.
Yes. So to be honest, I don't think that there's a possibility that we will have, let's say, some kind of CDU government who is supported by AfD, because at this point where CDU would allow AfD to support anything of them, the coalition is going to be break up. So the Social Democrats would never, ever support it in any case that you have some influence of AfD. So, and if this point is going to happen, you would have government, so in the theory, you would have a government of CDU with, what do you have, 28%, and this is not realistic. So I guess after the elections, there won't be a point that AfD is going to come to a situation where they have any opportunity to support a kind of government, so as we have it in Sweden, for example. So I guess this won't happen, and the only way that we will have a solution is that we have new elections that will come in, let's say, 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, and what do you make of this point? I'm especially interested in this split. That was one of my favorite kind of graphs of the election, was this split, especially among young people, and this is a pattern we see right across Europe. There's kind of young men are like voting for right-wing populist parties like the AfD, and young women seem to be kind of going to the left. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a very so we face. I guess we all right-wing parties face two problems. So we face a problem that we have not enough female voters, at least, and we have so especially in Germany, we are not able to convince elder people. So you see in Germany, as we just said, I guess elder people, if you just have a look of the population that are, let's say, elder than 70%, I guess they still vote for CDU and SPD with in some of 70 or 80%. Yes, and yes, I guess we won't be able to solve this this problem, but you know, they lose voters with every elections. They lose hundreds of voters just because they die. At least, yeah, it's like that. Yeah, it's not nice to say that, but it's really like that. And you know, on the other hand, you know, we have to think about how we can gain more female voters, and I guess we have to think about how we can involve them more into our party. And I guess we have some opportunities to let them more part in our parties. You know, if you speak with women, they always say, you know, your language is too aggressive. You have you don't focus out enough what positions are more important for women. Let me give one example. Just tonight, what we are talking about is migration, economics, maybe security. Yes, but I guess, you know, if you speak to women, they say, okay, why don't you talk more about family? Why don't you talk about how it is easier for women to have the children on the one hand and go to work on the other hand? And I guess it is important for many right-wing parties in the whole of Europe that we are able to speak more about problems that are more relevant for women. And this is, I guess this is really a difficult task, but we have to manage that.
Yeah, Frank and then Sabina. Yeah.
Yes, so it's a huge problem. And here at MCC Brussels, we're going to have a special event which is devoted towards asking the question, why are women turned off from conservatism? Why is there this estrangement that has kicked in, which happens everywhere? And I think that there are many reasons for that. I know I experience this all the time. I'm about to go to a conference, to speak at a conference in Central Europe, where every single member of all the panels are men, right? So it's not exactly a woman-friendly event, and certainly I'm glad I'm not a young guy looking for companionship there, because it would be very disappointing. But it seems to me that one of the things that has occurred is that a lot of conservatives don't know how to talk to women and don't know how to take women seriously. I think I slightly disagree with one point about Alex, which is that we seem to think that the way you get to women voters is by talking about the family, which is really a very one aspect of what they're doing. And that's what a lot of conservatives have been doing this now for 10 years, talking about the family, having family-friendly policies, making it easier for women to work and have children. That doesn't cut it. I think that something else is required in order to do that. And that requires understanding what, actually being much more empathic and understanding what women are like. And there are certain issues. I mean, I do think it's quite important that, for example, we look at, for example, the problem of reproduction. In Poland, the government lost the election principally over the issue of abortion. I mean, the whole of Warsaw, was lost because of that. Worth asking that, whether there are any lessons to making such a huge issue out of that. And there are a number of other areas where it seems to me that there are problems that are not really being addressed properly. I say this, with a broken heart, because I take the view that until we learn to win women on our side, conservative populist parties are never going to get a majority in Europe. I think it's inconceivable. Yeah. So it's an absolute obligation that we crack this problem one way or the other. I don't care how you do it, but you have got to address this problem and find an answer to this.
Yeah. Sabina, some reflections?
Yeah. Well, we do our Berlin Salons, and we found the same thing that we found whenever we talk about, economics, the topics you said, we had mainly men. And then we did one on abortion, and it was full. It was absolutely packed, and it was almost all women, and we had a fantastic discussion. So I think maybe we just need to, so I agree with what Frank said. I mean, the other topic, which I think we need to look at, Frank alluded to it, was the Self-Determination Act. So there are topics which are very, very important for women. So the Self-Determination Act is actually anti-women. It's an attack on women, and there's quite a lot of women who feel very strongly about it. And I don't know why, for example, the AfD couldn't sort of channel into that. And, you've got these people like Mr. Krah, who tells young boys how to find girlfriends, and then people say, oh my God, you've got a woman saying, oh my God, is that the kind of party I'm supposed to vote for, sort of thing. There is maybe an explanation for that, and that is that we had a very feminized world in the last years, and that everything has been much more geared towards women, and so men. I have a daughter and a son, and I see it in my own children, that boys often felt much more this kind of woke sort of pressure on them, and which is maybe why they might turn more to the AfD. But I do think we have to overcome that completely.
Yeah, a very quick response, and then we'll go back out. Yeah.
Just to have one, I just think about concrete things that we could change, and I guess, it's always good to be self-critic, and I guess what is a problem is also, women are always, I guess they want to be represented by women. I guess a problem of many parties in Europe is that we have too many women that are able to be voted, or that are just going to be in the front of the party. And this is something, I guess, we are against quotes, and we don't. But this doesn't lead to the fact that we have less women. So we should. I guess it's always important to have a mix of young and old people, and it's always so important to have a mix of female and male candidates, and this is just something we have to support in all right-wing parties in whole Europe.
Yeah, sure. Let's get a few more questions, comments. Who would like to speak? Please raise your hand. Lights are bright, so make sure it's right up, because I kind of... Yeah, okay, there's a gentleman there. Is there someone from this side of the room, or is it split?
Hi there, yeah. So Beatrix von Storch, excuse my pronunciation, went on British media to say that it is AfD policy to deport legally settled Afghan refugees in Germany back to the Taliban in Afghanistan. It was met with wide condemnation across the UK political landscape, and you're just talking about the issue of women there and the message that sends, and what are the panelists' opinions on this quite stark and controversial policy that has been made public to British media? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Good question. Interesting thing to reflect on. Any more questions, comments? We can carry this on. I'm sure there's plenty you want to take our panelists to task on. No, okay. Well, let's dig into the I guess the question of remigration. We can use it as a. I mean, you can explain or defend the actual AfD policy if you like, and then I'll maybe broaden it out a bit to Frank and Sabina, because I think it's a question for the right-wing or populist forces right across Europe as to what to make of this. But Alexander.
Yeah, first of all, it's just the term you just used is wrong. So I guess the media are told always about deportation. This is a sentence no one ever said in AfD, and we had a lot of we tried to get them into to judge, and we won all these. So I guess the problem is that in the German media there's a lot of things said about AfD, and this is just totally wrong. And for example, it is totally wrong that anyone in AfD talked about deportation. And on the other hand, yes, of course, it's one of our goals that we have a lot of remigration. And remigration means, for example, that we have a lot of refugees in Germany. I guess in some it's over 2 million. And many of these refugees, there's just no reason anymore to have them in our land. And for example, in we talk about Syria, yes, most of the refugees said, okay, we came to Europe because we are not able to live in the system. And now the system has changed. And, those people who came there because they weren't able to live in the old system, they are now able to live in a new system. And it's, of course, a possibility. And it's, of course, necessary just to send them back to their home and to give them the opportunity to build up their home again. And this is just what we mean by remigration. So, for example, if you are a refugee and you don't have any reason anymore to live in Germany, it is important that you go back to your home. If you are a foreigner who is not able to live our own, who has to be, who depends on social payments, and a lot of people that come to Germany in the last years are only able to survive because of social payments. They should go back to their home. And at least, and this is also mentioned, we have a very big problem in Germany because we have a lot of knife attacks. If you think about New Year, we have violence in many German cities, and this is just because of migration. And all these people has to go back to your home, and this is just what we mean by remigration. And on the other hand, you have a lot of immigrants in Germany that are a good part of the society. You have a good job who are able to integrate in our society, and no one in AfD has something against these people. They're a good part of our society, and they can stay in Germany. So I guess on the one hand, you have just to say we got good immigrants, they could stay in Germany, and you got also a lot of people that are not good for our society, and we have to get them back home, and this is what we mean when we say we need to remigrate them.
Right, and yeah, Sabina, no, the applause is fine. You're welcome to clap. So Sabina, we obviously didn't invite you here necessarily to talk about immigration, but it is one of the questions that's really forced to the fore, and the AfD actually do force it to the fore in many ways. That plenty of parties across right-wing or populist parties across Europe are very happy to talk about needing to limit migration. Even like the central parties can say, yeah, we also want to limit migration. It's a different question when you begin to talk about what should we do with some people who have either overstayed their visas, have got no right to be here, whose circumstances have changed, et cetera. What's your take on it?
Well, I mean, I think I don't know exactly what Beatrice von Storch said, but I think that question is interesting. So one of the problems we had, and it started in 2015, was that the type of immigrants who came were almost all young men of a certain age, and people naturally then said, well, is it possible that only young men of a certain age, the best health, the strongest, are actually the ones who are the most needy? So you could say there's something very wrong about that. Focusing on, on Afghan women, I would say it would be completely wrong, because I think one of the things we can say for sure is that Afghan women have been sold down the drain because there's nothing worse than living as a woman under a Taliban regime. So I would, I'd look at that case, and I would say it would be very wrong if somebody in the AfD said we want to, now deport every Afghan woman. I don't think we have very many. I think it would be great if they started deporting people who are criminals. So I just read yesterday in the newspaper, there's an interview with a guy who was responsible from the police surveillance just in Bavaria, and he says he's got about 1,500 people who should be deported. Most of them are from Syria and Afghanistan. And then the question was, well, what did they do? And he said, half of them are violent and the other half are murderous. And I was like, I mean, it's true. It's an FSZ article now. And he says, we have to really observe them very carefully. We can't deport them because of German law, because they've been here. If we miss the deportation a time of 6 months, we can't do that. All these things, it would be great if we started on that, rather than having discussions about Afghan women, who really are in big trouble.
Yeah. Frank?
Well, the question becomes, can you have Merkelization in reverse? I mean, that's really the challenge. And it seems to me that we have a number of problems that we got to revisit. Number one, we're still using the word refugees, where most of the people that are claiming refugee status are manifestly not refugees as it's classically understood. Refugee has become a synonym for a migrant. It doesn't necessarily mean what it used to be. And I think that deception that was kind of created by the CDU earlier on, and also other parts of Europe, is a tremendous problem for the whole of Europe. So the question then becomes, you're stuck with this situation, how you deal with it. I think the way you deal with that is, first of all, you deal with this positively by making sure that you build a vibrant German society. Secondly, I think there are things, I always argued when I was active in British politics, is that if you have people who are refugees or migrants coming into your country, who are living on Social Security and not working, number one, at the very least, they shouldn't get Social Security payments. They should not be supported by the state financially. And secondly, you're entitled to revisit their right to stay within that country. I do think that we need something a little bit more robust than simply sitting around with your hands folded, relying on the judges to decide whether it's okay or not okay to deport people. Because if you do that, then you are going to run into a lot of problems. And it seems to me that the question for German society, this is a decision they're going to make, is that do they want Germany 10, 15, 20 years from now to be Germany, to look like Germany, to basically promote German culture as we actually understand it, to speak the language, the German language. Is that what we want to see? Or do we basically want to turn Germany into something that really resembles Brussels, more than Bavaria, if you know what I mean? So I think that's really the challenge that faces us, and therefore I do think that robust policies are called for. Myself, I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to, force people back into Afghanistan unless they're criminals, unless they're not working and all the rest of that. I think that you make those kind of distinctions. But I think it is really important that at some point, you got to grasp the problem actively and robustly. Because if you carry on the way we're going on now, then I think every single year the problem will get worse and worse. And maybe I think our friends in the AfD will have to learn to communicate those problems in a more delicate, diplomatic kind of manner. But essentially, the sentiment behind it, I can live with. I've got no problems with that.
Great, thanks. Ed, do we want to come out for a last round of questions? I'm sure there's a few more points that want to be made, especially maybe relating to the migration issue, but to other things. Okay, so we can take him again.
Related to what we were saying now, Frank, with the European Union, where is the limit? Where is the red line? Or where is this the finish? Or where can we stand for this firewall, you call it, or the cordon sanitaire? We're seeing that everything that happens in Europe right now, these days, helps Brussels to become bigger and bigger and to absorb more power. Ukraine war, more Brussels. The AfD is rising, more Brussels. In Spain, for example, Vox is rising, more Brussels. What will be for you the red line where we say no more? We have to counter back somehow. We have to counterattack. Thank you.
Yeah, good. And there's a gentleman just at the back, and then there's at the front as well. So, great.
I'm Ali from VUB, Political Science Masters. My question is that what are the impacts of Ukraine-Russia war on the Germans' election and the far-right resurgence that we have seen? Because there's a lot of economic downfall, and so what were the impacts of whole of this issue on the elections and the political scenario of Europe? Thank you so much.
Great, thanks. And then, yeah, at the front.
Bruno, I work for the Bruno Waterfield Times of London here in Brussels. I think one of the things that's really, really striking about the whole migration debate, particularly in light of populism, is the lack of its actual ethnic or racial or racist, I should say, character. The debate is overwhelmingly civic. It's all about in whose interests do the apparatuses of public authority work in. Are they in control of the borders? No. Are they able to get rid of people who pose a threat to societies and communities? No. They are civic questions, overwhelmingly civic questions. And if you look at the surge of support for parties like AfD, but it's the same in other countries, Austria, the Netherlands, everywhere where you look, it is fascinating that the debate over migration is overwhelmingly civic. And that's very, very, very important because it becomes a democratic question. It becomes a democratic, social, national question, not a question of ethnic nationalism of white versus brown, or whatever, although there are a lot of people on the left who want to make it that. They want to racialise it and say it's about whiteness. The AfD is about whiteness. And I think that's the secret of the AfD's success. I mean, if you look at its support now in the German working class, it's 38%. It was 6% in 2013. That's astonishing. The SPD is disappearing. And the reason why you get that kind of support is because the AfD on immigration is saying, look, we're not about standing up for whites, we're about standing up for you. We're about putting your interests above refugee conventions, European Union asylum law. And again, it's just coming back to that really fascinating look at the turnout as well, everything about the German elections that shows this is a political, democratic, civil moment.
Great, thanks. Anyone else want to come in? Yeah, so there's a few. I'll take a bigger round of people, and then we'll probably do some wrapping up. But yeah, so there's also some at the front, Anna, if there's another microphone. Yeah.
No, just a short comment about the English gentleman's comment. I think it was only at the AfD, no, not the AfD, at the MCC that I met my first ethnic German AfD member. Though I work in Germany often, all of the AfD members I know are Turkish or even African, who all say, what happened to the Germany that we came here for? Just a comment on the side.
Yeah, no, a useful corrective. Okay, lady at the front.
Yes, hello. My question is mostly on my surprise. The fact that I believe that the immigration policy of Germany has been very successful. At least this is how I consider it when I compare it to many neighboring countries. I see that there has been a very selective immigration policy, and especially when there were some sectors, such as the medical one, which was lacking personnel, well, there has been a launch of a campaign in order to attract from other countries. This is one thing, and I believe when I compared it with other countries, I believe it has been very smart. I can see the Syrian refugee crisis. I can compare it with the French one. Germany opened the borders. It got more refugees than France or any other country. And was this a mistake? I believe it was not. It got a lot of qualified workers. So this made Germany benefit a lot. And since I compared it with France, since between Macron and Scholz has been this duo which was a little bit leaning mostly towards France for what concerns the two main countries which were leading the EU on the decision-making process. Do you believe it will be a bit different now with the result with the new party in power? Thank you.
Great, thanks. No, they're useful corrective in some ways. Now, is there anyone else who wants to get in? Otherwise, I'll ask for some. Okay, there's this gentleman here. This is good.
Thank you. Maybe a quick reaction. Well, the employment rate of Syrian refugees in Germany is below 20%. So I'm not sure if they contributed that much. My question is on the foreign policy of the AfD. What do you think? Alice Weidel mentioned that Germany should have good relations with Russia. How do you see that happening? Is that a realistic goal? And how would that play into, German relations with its Eastern European neighbors, like, let's say, my country of Poland? Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, so lots on the table. I can remind you of some of the questions. I guess, I'm particularly interested in this. There was a question about, Alexander, the degree to which some of the policies that the AfD supports involve a confrontation with Brussels, and specifically, the AfD's, of all of the populist parties in Europe, obviously is some of the strongest kind of anti-EU policies. So that's useful. You can also touch on the Ukraine question, on the successful immigration question, or this question about is there a kind of civic ideal at the heart of the AfD policies?
Yeah. So I'll start with the European question. So I don't think that the power of Brussels is increasing at the moment. And let me let's see two different points. So on the one hand, we see in the European Parliament that the right is increasing in the last election. So we don't have a majority in the European Parliament, but it's always more difficult to do something against us. Let me give an example. We, as AfD, we were able to get through our amendments, and this we aren't able to do that in Germany, but we are able to do that in the European Parliament. Another example, the EPP, so the conservatives in the European Parliament.
I'm glad you put it in scare quotes.
They have amendments that were only get through with the right wing in the Parliament. So I guess the influence of the right-wing parties in the European Parliament is increasing, and it's rapidly increasing. And just see the point of Ukraine. So we now see we have a new government in the US, and they say, okay, We do it on our own now. We are going to find a solution. We are going to try to talk to Russia. We are going to try to talk to Ukraine. And here is not on the table the European Union. So they are not discussing, or we are so unnecessary that they don't need us to see, to get us on the table. They say we don't need you to solve this problem. And I guess we have a lot of things where the power is decreasing of the European Parliament, and the opportunity to get things through without right wings is always becoming low.
I'll answer a couple and then we'll...
So I try to answer a couple of questions. So to the field of migration. So I don't think that there are only immigrants in the AfD, but as you mentioned, there are a lot of immigrants that also take part inside of the AfD, and this is quite interesting because I just said if you're a good immigrant, so if you have your own job, if you are part of the society, we don't have anything against you. And we have a lot of those people who take part of AfD at the moment. And if you talk to these people, they always say, when we came to Germany, we have to build up anything of our own. We had to get to work. We weren't able to get good social services payment. We have to build up anything on our own. And we now see that people are coming who get anything, who don't have to work, who are getting violence in our cities, and we are against that. Yeah, we see that point in Germany, and this is you can't say that we have elder or the old immigrants especially who are very desperate of this development. And let me say about the benefits of migration at the moment. I guess this is really totally wrong. We just said so the employment rate of this new immigrants is very, very low. We have the social service. We had a change in Germany. It's called Bürgergeld, and more than half of those persons who get this are immigrants, and they are all the new immigrants. So, and in Germany, the left wings always say, okay, there's one doctor, there's one service in the medical aid, and in some, this is really not a good thing for our economy. Yes, of course there are some people who are a benefit for an economy, but it's ridiculous to say that the new migration has any good influence on our economy and on a perspective of the society. So what are the developments? We have Christmas markets in Germany, and we have any year attack of an Islamic immigrant on this Christmas markets. We have to secure any Christmas market in Germany. In big cities, Germans are not able to celebrate New Year anymore because immigrants are making such crazy things with their fireworks. Yeah, leftists say, okay, firework is a problem, but fireworks wasn't a problem before these criminal immigrants were able to make stupid things with that. So I guess in a general view, so neither for the economy nor for the society, we don't benefit of this. This is really a stupid argument.
Yeah, well, I think we did know what your opinion was going to be on that question, but you put the point very well regardless. Sabina, anything you'd like to pick up on to conclude? As I say, there's this point about the lack of a kind of ethnic component to the AfD's vision of Germany, or maybe you slightly disagree, and there's also these questions about the confrontation with Brussels and Ukraine, and there's a lot on the table still, but what would you like to wrap up on?
Well, I mean, I just, in addition to what you said, I think that we have a double problem in Germany, which is that a lot of immigrants came at the time when the German economy was actually going down. So that was an additional problem, that people couldn't really be integrated. And secondly, there was a big problem in that some of the cultural issues were not talked about, and they're not talked about now either. So we have attacks. We have to be fair and say that a lot of the victims of these attacks are also immigrants. So at the Christmas market, many of them are actually immigrant victims. So meaning the state cannot protect people living inside Germany. And we're not talking about Germans. We're talking about everybody living inside Germany, which is in danger because of the situation. And at the same time, you have a complete shyness of actually addressing the problem, meaning it's not immigrants. It's the problem of Islamism, for example. These attacks were mostly done by radical Islamists, yet we're not really allowed to say this. We had an attack a couple of weeks ago against a trade union protest, which was clearly committed by an Islamist. Had it been committed by a far-right Nazi, which could have also happened, we would still be talking about it. But at that time, immediately, the instinct was don't talk about it, never mention the word Islamism. Even the trade union didn't want to talk about it. So I also disagree that it was a complete success story. I just put the emphasis a little bit different to you, because I would say the mistakes, the reason why it wasn't a success story, are also because of the way our society is organized. We have an economic problem, and we have a problem of really knowing what we demand of immigrants. And we realize this, we see this now. So just one little more example. When we had this October 7th attack on Israel, 2023, we had TV cameras going through Hamburg, interviewing people from the Syrian community, and they found nobody, but absolutely nobody, who was willing to say anything negative about these attacks. People were absolutely shocked that we had immigrant communities cheering at the worst massacre against Jews since the Holocaust. And obviously something must be going deeply, deeply wrong if that's the case. So we need to confront these problems. Yes, there are many who are well integrated. Yes, there are many who are working, but there are also very, very big problems.
Great, thanks. Frank, some concluding thoughts?
Well, I just want to look at one problem, which is this constant attempt to argue, as for example, recently the German Federation of Employers, that we have an economic problem, and over the next 5-10 years, we'll need 30,000 or 100,000 immigrants every year to come in because the German people are getting old or whatever. And for a very long time now, every time there is any kind of labor shortage or skill shortage, there seems to be this instinctive reaction, we'll get immigrants to do the job. Now, this short-term fix is actually a very big problem, because throughout Europe, migration on a mass scale has served to create a condition where instead of investing in new technology, instead of raising economic productivity and raising the productivity of labor by innovating the economic production, you bring in immigrants to do the job. And when you bring in immigrants to do the job, instead of thinking about, well, shouldn't our society try to match the productivity level of America? Instead of doing that, oh yeah, we'll get some more migrants in because they can do the job. But the problem is that it creates two problems. One is economic, which basically means that the German economy and all the economies of Europe are basically having a fundamental problems of productivity, of economic stagnation. Even Germany, which used to be the powerhouse of Europe. So economically, it's a disaster because you think it's such a great idea, but you forget that it's actually much more important for Germany to train young German people to do those kinds of jobs than to bring in people from the outside. It might take a bit longer. It's a more serious investment, but you're investing in your community. And the second problem it creates, is, aside from the economic one, is the cultural one. The ones that Sabina talked about, where you basically create a polarized, multicultural world where there really isn't one dominant society, one dominant culture, which obviously is a mega problem everywhere in Europe. On the question about Europe, about red lines, I can give you a personal answer and a more diplomatic answer. My personal answer would be that the red line has been reached, as far as I'm concerned, in many, many ways. And I do think that there are some mega problems that are kind of coming up in the very federalist, colonial kind of way that the EU is operating. I think there's a difference between the shift in parliament that Alex talked about and the fact that the Commission and its whole network of NGOs and everybody else is still completely in charge. And behind the scenes, they are doing the most despicable things to retain control. They actually are paying money to organizations to in a sense, to subvert the democratic will of people throughout Europe. They're paying money to organizations to bring about regime change in societies in Central Europe and elsewhere. And when you think about the fact, and we published a report which showed that literally billions of euros are being spent on propaganda to promote the EU instead of investing in what Europeans really need. When you get to a situation like that, which is essentially the corruption of public life by Brussels, I do think that people like ourselves have got to step up a little bit and put forward a more robust opposition, both inside and outside of Parliament. Because if this thing continues on indefinitely, I think it will doom Europe to complete irrelevancy in the long run.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that Frank did a little advert for one of our reports that's come out. But on your chair is details of that report that Frank mentioned. There's also details on your chair of the other report that we just released by Sabina on the free speech crisis in Germany. For now, thank you very much for joining us. Do make sure you stay in touch with us. If you enjoyed watching the podcast live, let us know. We might try more things like this, but make sure you're following the podcast as well. That was not just for the camera, that was for all of you. For now, shortly there'll be a reception in the next room, but please, on your way out, if you didn't manage to register because of the rush at the beginning, please do go and register, because we really do want to stay in touch with you and make sure that you hear about the rest of our events. But can we thank our panel?
Yeah.